Hello, everybody, and let me welcome you to a class I am so excited about because it's about Teresa of Avila, taught by Mirabai Starr, and I am thrilled. Mirabai is the author of numerous books, one of them a translation of Teresa of Avila's brilliant book on the interior castle. And she's also brilliant on John of the Cross. She translated it from the original Spanish. So we have a scholar here and a wondrous teacher. Her work is poetic. And I would say all of this about her. I say it behind her back, so I'm going to say it to her face. But she's also a dear friend and soul companion. So through the years, I've gotten to know and love Mirabai dearly. So having her teach this class is a thrill because we share a love of Teresa of Avila, which brought us together, as a matter of fact, years ago. So, lesson one is contemplative prayer, humility, and self knowledge. And I'm going to turn it over to you, dear friend, and I'll see you at the end of class.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our Teresa with your community in mind. Okay, friends, we are going to go on a voyage for the next 2 weeks, this week and next week. 4 sessions together to enter deeply into Teresa's journey to the center of the soul. And I really invite you to take this opportunity to truly enter the castle of your own soul, rather than looking at this as an interesting kind of metaphysical map, to tuck in your pocket for some future time or something like that. To rather than collect your mystical, commodities for your spiritual pantry, I am asking you to throw off your sandals, as they say in Hinduism, and take to the open sea. Because we don't have much time to waste. The times are urgent, and we need these teachings like food, like air. And not just for ourselves. I love the 14th century mystic Julian of Norwich, also another one of my girls. I call them my girls. And I've also translated her from Middle English to contemporary English. And Julian received these visions on her deathbed. She had a near-death experience. And as she unpacked the visions over the remainder of her life, once she recovered, she realized and said again and again in her text, I received these gifts from God, not for myself alone, but for all beings. And that's true for, I think, all of us, that when we can be resourced by these great mystical masters like Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross and Rumi and others, we become a resource for others, and that's needed now more than ever. So as we begin, I invite you to take a moment to take some nice deep breaths, and I will recite Teresa of Avila's Bookmark prayer as an invocation for our time together. This is a prayer that was found in her breviary when she died. I don't know if I said that right. Written in her own hand. And it's a prayer of consolation for when times are difficult, which they most certainly are right now. It's probably what drove you to gather with us for this class, and what drives you to teachings from people like Carolyn Myss, who are speaking truth at a time when we can't afford to hear anything but the truth. So if you want to close your eyes, feel free, or just simply turn inward and drop into your body and into the present moment. I will recite this very short prayer first in Spanish, the original 16th century Spanish in which Teresa wrote it, and then my English translation. Nada te turbe, nada te espante, todo se pasa, Dios no se muda, la paciencia todo lo alcanza. Quien Dios tiene, nada le falta, solo Dios basta. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. Everything passes. God alone is unchanging. Whoever has God lacks nothing. With patience, all things are possible. God alone is enough. Amen. So a little reading from the opening of my introduction to the interior castle, to my translation of the interior castle. But these words are mine, and it's your invitation into this journey inward. The calling. There is a secret place, a radiant sanctuary, as real as your own kitchen, more real than that, constructed of the purest elements, overflowing with the 10,000 beautiful things, worlds within worlds, forests, rivers, velvet coverlets thrown over feather beds, fountains bubbling beneath a canopy of stars, bountiful woods, universal libraries, a wine cellar offering an intoxication so sweet you will never be sober again, a clarity so complete you will never again forget. This magnificent refuge is inside you. Enter. Shatter the darkness that shrouds the doorway. Step around the poisonous vipers that slither at your feet, attempting to throw you off course. Be bold. Be humble. Put away the incense and forget the incantations they taught you. Ask no permission from the authorities. Slip away. Close your eyes and follow your breath to the still place that leads to the invisible path that leads you home. So I think I will begin now by saying a little bit about my relationship with Teresa so that you understand kind of the ground from which these teachings flower in me and kind of the steps that brought me to this place where I'm offering these teachings to you. So when I was a teenager, I became a Sufi, and I was a very ecstatic Sufi, as many are, and I was madly in love with Rumi, Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, the medieval Persian mystic. And I was a follower of Rumi, not so much as a poet, although I loved his poetry, but as a spiritual master. And then when I was 20, I went to Spain to study Spanish literature. It was my minor in college. My major was anthropology and my minor was Spanish. So I spent a semester in Sevilla, studying Spanish poetry and prose. And that's where I encountered John of the Cross. And he reminded me exactly of Rumi. So many of the images he used in his poetry of fire and gardens and wine and intoxication and sobriety and a lot of the actual concrete nouns that he used were precisely those of John of the Cross. And it evoked in me the same kind of passion and longing for God. So I became so enamored of John of the Cross that in graduate school, I ended up doing my thesis on the dark night of the soul. Years later, I'm a religious studies professor at the University of New Mexico. I'm assigning Dark Night of the Soul in translation to my students, and they're bored to death. A friend and colleague says, look, you're fluent in Spanish. You love mystical writing. Why don't you translate it? And so, and my friend had just found a New York agent for his first novel. He showed the agent the idea. The agent said, let me see if I can do anything with that. He sold it right away. It was the time, it was, 20 years ago approximately, when all those translations of mystics, but mostly Buddhist, Hindu, and Sufi mystics were all the rage, but Christian mystics not so much. But it was sort of the right thing at the right time. So John of the Cross, who I already adored, became my entry point to Teresa of Avila, who at first I found very distasteful because John of the Cross was so kind of steady and contemplative. There was this deep quiet and kind of spiritual maturity that I recognized in John of the Cross that really resonated for me. And Teresa was all over the place. She was quite flamboyant and audacious and gregarious and expressive and all over the map, very kind of wild. And at the time, I was trying to be very disciplined and zen. But what happened was that after I finished my translation of John of the Cross, in fact, the very day that my first advanced copy of my translation of Dark Night of the Soul was delivered to my door, my 14-year-old daughter, Jenny, was killed in a car accident that same day. I had already agreed rather reluctantly with my publisher to translate The Interior Castle by Teresa of Avila. It just seemed like the logical next step. They wanted me to do it, and I agreed. But what happened was translating this book, The Interior Castle, became for me not only a refuge, not only did Teresa of Avila save my life, but it opened my entire spiritual path in ways that I thought I was on the path for many years at that point. So from the time I was, say, 15 to at this point I was 40. I had a contemplative practice. I was teaching, I was speaking, but the day that I entered into this translation was the day my journey really began. I know that sounds a little dramatic, but I'm dramatic like Teresa. Turns out, when you don't like someone, often it's because they have qualities that you reject in yourself. It turns out I'm a drama queen, just like Teresa. If only I was just like Teresa. She was a spiritual genius. But translating the saints is such an experience of what they call in Hinduism darshan, like sitting at the feet of the master and absorbing everything you can. And so I became very intimate with Teresa, and she became that beloved. I think of her as my Jewish auntie, because Teresa of Avila came from a converso family in Spain, a family that was forced by the Inquisition to convert to Christianity from Judaism or be exiled. And Jews, Christians, and Muslims, of course, had lived for 700 years in Spain at that point in relative harmony. I mean, I can't imagine that it was completely harmonious, but knowing human beings and societies and communities, but there was tremendous exchange of ideas, of mathematics and philosophy and art and architecture and sacred studies of every kind. The Zohar the Jewish mystical teachings came out of this era, this confluence, the convivencia of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in Spain under Muslim rule for all those centuries before Fernando and Isabella came in and kicked out the Jews and the Muslims. So Teresa was born in 1515. Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492. So you can see that she was freshly emerged into a post convivencia world when the fragrance of Judaism and Sufism, Islam, was still very much permeating the atmosphere. But it was dangerous to be Jewish. So even though I consider her to be my Jewish auntie, who was there for me, serving me tea while I was grieving and translating during that year following Jenny's death, she couldn't admit to her Jewishness in her lifetime. It came out clearly afterwards. But for a woman and a woman with Jewish roots to be revered as a santa, as a saint, even in her lifetime, was really extraordinary, and she was an extraordinary person. She had an interesting kind of extended dry period, though, spiritually. Like so many of us, when she was very young, she had deep religious fervor or spiritual thirst, and it expressed itself in all kinds of ways, including entering a convent at age 18. But she didn't really feel suited to monastic life because she was so wild and so free. She was beautiful. She had long, dark, curly hair and big black eyes. Everyone was in love with her. In fact, the way she first ended up in a convent was when she was 16. Her mother died when she was 12, by the way, in childbirth, giving birth to her ninth child at age 33. You do the math. It was a brutal life for women as baby factories, even though they were a privileged family. In fact, sorry, I'm going off on another tangent. They were a privileged family, so that was how they were able to buy a noble title. Her grandfather was able to buy the title of hidalgo, a nobleman or a lord, by virtue of the family's money, which enabled them to escape the Inquisition and probably pretend at first to convert to Christianity. But by the time Teresa's father came of age, having experienced tremendous persecution of his family, his father and mother and siblings, he was like more Catholic than the most Catholic people. So he raised his children very, very Catholic. But when Teresa was 16, her mother had been dead for 4 years, to whom she was very, very close. And she was unfettered. Her father could not control her. Like so many adolescents, she was doing her own thing and defying authority. And finally, something happened. We know not what, some scandal. And so Teresa it was like, that's it. Her father, who adored her, didn't know what else to do. He sent her to a convent. And after a year in the convent, he thought, she'd come home and get on with her life as a respectable young woman and become betrothed to a respectable young man, et cetera, et cetera. But instead, she decided she wanted to stay. He didn't want her to stay in the convent. He loved her and he wanted her to have a life in society. So she finally, at 18, snuck away in the middle of the night and joined Augustinian convent. Much like, it reminds me of Claire of Assisi, who had to leave her wealthy, privileged, noble family in the middle of the night to join Francis. Who knows? Maybe that's where Teresa got the idea. So she joined the convent, but she was not suited to contemplative life. She was way too outgoing. And then there was a struggle. And that struggle, see if you can relate to this in any way. That struggle resulted in Teresa becoming physically ill. I think Hildegard of Bingen, same thing. I think when we fight with our nature, fight against who we really are, it can often create great discord in the body and the mind. And Teresa knew there was something in her that was drawn to God, for sure, but not to religion or religiosity so much. To Christ, yes, but to Christian strictures and structures, not so much. So she battled in this way for quite some time, became very ill. The nuns didn't know what to do with her, so they sent her back to her father. You deal with her, dude. And she became sicker and sicker and finally went into a coma. In fact, they thought she was dead. They even put wax on her eyelids, and the nuns back at the convent dug her grave. But she woke up, tried to peel her eyes open. Her father was sitting vigil at her bedside and noticed a fluttering in her chest and said, "The child lives." And so Teresa made a very long road back to recovery. She was paralyzed for months. She could only move her fingers and and toes at first, and then her hands and feet, and had to learn to walk again. So these illnesses and headaches and other rheumatoid arthritis, perhaps, we don't know, continued throughout her life. So she went back into the convent, and then everything dried up. Like when during her recovery, she fell in love with contemplative prayer. Contemplative prayer meaning not just the rote discursive prayers that she learned, but those periods of silent contemplation when she would turn inward and rest in a deep sense of stillness. And she loved drinking from that wellspring of quiet and stillness and a felt sense of the presence of God. But eventually, as she kind of moved up the ranks of leadership in the convent, all of her initial feeling of sacred presence began to dry up, and she became a very effective administrator, but really lived in internal desert for quite some time until she was 39. At that time, she was one day walking through the hallway of the convent, attending to some business, and saw that there was a statue of Christ being scourged at the pillar. There was Christ just being whipped and looking up. And she looked down at this statue, and she was about to pick it up and put it back where it belonged. And as she looked down and he looked up, their eyes met. And for her, her beloved came alive. And as she gazed into his face and saw his suffering, right behind that suffering, she perceived unconditional love. And his love for her awakened her love for him. And the next thing she knew, she was prostrate on the floor, weeping and calling out to him and saying, "Beloved, do not ever let me stop loving you as I love you now. I am so sorry that I forgot. I forgot who you are. I forgot who I am. I forgot that this is all that matters, this love. In fact, I'm not going to move from this spot until you can promise me that I will always love you like this." And apparently she received the answer, and she got up. And it was after that experience that is known as Teresa's second conversion that the floodgates opened, and all of these visions and voices and locutions, they're called, and raptures and ecstasies began to flood through her on a regular basis. Perhaps levitation. It is, she says in the book of my life, her autobiography, which I also had the great fortune of translating, that she levitated, and that was reported in her canonization hearings. So all kinds of, as you can imagine, dramatic and unorthodox experiences, which, guess what, drew the attention of the Inquisition, who demanded that she document every spiritual experience she could remember that she had ever had, starting as a young child, which she did, which is what became her life story, the book of my life, which I recommend very highly. It was a wonderful read. And so after that, and after she was investigated for these experiences, she began to see that she needed to reform the Carmelite order because it was lost. It was mired in all of the externals and the superficial forms that the rest of the Catholic Church was suffering from in this time. It's what led to the Protestant Reformation, frankly, how the Catholic Church had really lost its connection to the sacred, to the contemplative life more than anything. And so she wanted to reform the Carmelite order to which she belonged and return it to its contemplative roots, to the original ancient Carmelite order that came from the Holy Land in the 2nd, 3rd centuries. And so she did. She called it the Discalced Carmelite order, the barefoot Carmelites, symbolic of the return to the values of simplicity and solitude and silence and contemplative prayer. Although nothing could put a damper on Teresa's love of life and her vivacious spirit. So even in a contemplative cloistered order, Teresa and her, the way that she was with her sisters, the nuns, her daughters she called them, was very alive and filled with dance and music and joy and long periods of silence and contemplative prayer. Toward the end of her life, when she had learned to balance her ecstatic impulses and her practical nature, Teresa was also very practical. I mean, it takes a very level head to be able to administrate an entire reform movement. But little by little, her ecstatic impulses integrated. It's not that they went away, but they became more integrated with the whole of her personality so that she was able to function at a high level and still, in her private moments of contemplative prayer, engage in a rapturous love affair with Christ in the center of her soul. So one day, she was in her early 60s at this point. She had been persecuted by the Inquisition her whole adult life by now. She had founded, I think, 17 convents and also monasteries for men. The movement included men. In fact, that's what John of the Cross did. She recruited John of the Cross when she was 52 and he was 26, and she heard about this incredibly gifted young Carmelite priest who was fixing to leave the order completely. He'd just been ordained and he was already disillusioned with religiosity and the organized, institutionalized monastic life, and was headed for the hills to live as a holy hermit when Teresa heard about him and summoned him and said, "Don't give up. I feel the way you do, and I would like you to lead the branch of my order for men." And he agreed, as he was so taken with her. And he also was the confessor for the women. In fact, he was much closer to the nuns than he probably ever was to the monks. In fact, another tangent, the monks, the mitigated or mainstream Carmelite friars, abducted him when he was 29. So at that point, I guess it had been, what did I say? He was 29, she was 53. I don't know. He had been with her for a few years when working diligently in her reform movement, when he was abducted by the mainstream Carmelites, who threw him into a prison cell in the hills outside of Toledo. And the prison cell was actually a converted latrine. So it was this small, fetid, dark stone cubicle that he couldn't even lie down in. He was there for 9 months before he miraculously escaped. And it was in his imprisonment, in fact, that all of his famous ecstatic love poetry to God emerged, and he memorized it and later wrote it down when he was free. So the reform movement was well underway by the time Teresa was in her early 60s. She was getting tired. She had grappled with all these illnesses and injuries. She'd also fallen down the stairs and broken her arm, and it never healed well. And so she was traveling with a priest friend, a beloved priest friend, one day, going to one of the monasteries or convents. I'm not sure which. And they took shelter in a roadside inn, a very rustic roadside hostel kind of place. And they had one of those late night spiritual conversations like I like to have with Carolyn when I get to be with her. You know, when you find those spiritual companions with whom you can share so deeply your heart and your soul. And they were talking, and Teresa was on fire. And just the wisdom and passion coming through her was stunning, right? And her priest friend said, "You know, you really need to write a book. This is really good stuff. People need to hear this." And she said, Padre, I can't. I'm tired. I'm old. The Inquisition, last time I wrote a book, the Inquisition stole it from me and then used it as evidence against me. I can't take that chance again. And I guess his response was, too bad. I'm a guy. You're a woman. I'm telling you what to do. I'm the priest. You have a vow of obedience. You need to write this book. Excuse me. I'm still getting over my COVID cough from a month ago. Anybody else? Yeah. So she went back to her room that night. She threw herself on her knees, her crotchety old knees, and she'd already lived longer than she thought she ever would, considering all the obstacles. And she said, Beloved, I know I have a vow of obedience, but if I'm going to write this book, you're going to actually have to do it for me. I can't do it myself. And here's the response she got. If you want to know, this is page, in case you get the book or have the book, it's page 35. It's the very opening of chapter 1. Today, while I was beseeching the beloved to speak through me, since I couldn't think of anything to say and had no idea how to begin to fulfill this particular vow of obedience, I had a vision that I will share with you now as a foundation we can build on. It came to me that the soul is like a castle made exclusively of diamond or some other very clear crystal. In this castle are a multitude of dwellings, just as in heaven there are many mansions. If we muse on this deeply, friends, we will see that the soul of a righteous person is none other than a garden in which the beloved takes great delight. What do you think a place might be like that such a king, so powerful and wise, so pure and filled with all good things, would find so delightful? I myself can come up with nothing as magnificent as the beauty and amplitude of a soul. A soul, the soul, any soul, your soul, my soul. Friends, this is revolutionary for so many reasons, but let me just pick 2. One is what she's saying is, I can't think of a more beautiful place in all of creation than the soul, than your soul, than my soul, than this garden in which the beloved takes great delight. So rather than seeing the human person as flawed and sinful and broken and needing to be purified and perfected in order to be worthy of connection to God, Teresa saw that it is the most beautiful place in creation, so beautiful that where else would the Holy One choose to dwell? So that's the first radical, revolutionary aspect of this vision of the interior castle, which you could also call an inner garden. The other dangerous, risky, perilous claim that Teresa was making here is that you don't need to ask permission from anyone to take that inner journey to union with the Holy One, with God. For her, it was Christ in the center of your own soul. Nothing you need to do. No hoops to jump through. No intermediaries to consult. All you have to do is turn inward. I mean, it's quite miraculous that Teresa wasn't not only excommunicated in her lifetime, but possibly killed for heresy. The only explanation I can find is that she was so charming and so smart that she seduced, I don't mean sexually, although there was an erotic element, the inquisitors. In fact, in the book of my life, when she's confessing to every single experience she's ever had and trying to prove that the experiences that she's had, the supernatural experiences were gifts from God rather than tricks of the devil. She addresses the inquisitors in the book as alternately as father and my son, talking to the same people. I mean, she was not afraid of them. She probably made jokes about them and with them. She said at one point, she said, I've known many learned men in my life, and they've done my soul a great deal of good. And I've also known quite a few half-learned men who have done me no end of harm. And she says this openly in her books. So as they investigated her, they undoubtedly received the transmission that was flowing through her, and it became clear that she was the real deal. I think it just was her very being that was that she sat in her authority in such a way that there was no questioning. So how do we enter? Let's just launch. We have about, 20 minutes before we'll bring Carolyn in for a little exchange. 20 minutes or so, maybe more. So what is the point at which what's that threshold for making that inner journey? By the way, it's not a one-time deal, this journey to the center of our beings. It sounds like this linear process where you go through the 7 dwellings, and when you get to the center one, you check each one off like a list, and then bingo, you have union with God and it's all over. Teresa says, first of all, it's not a straight line. In fact, even the idea of a building that you enter and make your way through deeper and deeper into the center chamber, even that is not quite it. It's it's more of a holographic phenomenon where the rooms, the dwellings, the mansions go in all directions, some above, she says, some below. In fact, let me see if I have a description of that here. Don't picture these dwellings. This is page 45, middle of the page. Don't picture these dwellings as arranged in a row, one after the other. Instead, turn your eyes to the center, which is the part of the palace where the king lives. Imagine a palmetto fruit. I don't know if you can imagine a palmetto fruit. I had to look it up when I was translating it. Layer upon layer must be peeled away to reach the tasty part in the middle. She's so embodied and grounded, our Teresa. She uses so much rich physical imagery. So it is with the interior castle. Many rooms surround the central chamber. Always visualize your soul as vast, spacious, and plentiful. This amplitude is impossible to exaggerate. The soul's capacity far transcends our imagining. The sun at the center of this place radiates to every part. So imagine that the outer chambers of this magnificent, spacious, bountiful, beautiful palace are dark, and the light is brightest at the center. Quick note on translation. The original word in Spanish for the mansions is morada, M-O-R-A-D-A. There are 7 moradas, 7 of these main chambers. I translated it as dwellings because I looked at many different possibilities of morada, and there is no adequate translation. It's a word that comes from Arabic, from the Moors, who had these small, sacred, round adobe structures that were used for prayer and contemplation. And we have them here in northern New Mexico, where I live, because in New Mexico, the Latinx people who live here, they call themselves Spanish. The Spanish people have been here for 500 years. They came from the original conquistadores who came from Spain in the 16th century during the period when Teresa lived. And it's in fact been a lot of research has indicated that many of the Jews who were fleeing Spain got on those ships and came to the New World, hoping to escape the Inquisition, but the Inquisition followed them to the so-called New World, to this continent of the Americas, these three continents of North, Central, and South America. So there's a lot of symbolism in the old churches here in northern New Mexico, which are still the main churches that are used. There's the Star of David, and a lot of Spanish families here light candles on Friday night. That's not mainstream Catholicism, y'all. The cemeteries have Jewish symbols, and as well as the churches and the altars and everything. So there's a lot of evidence for that here. And there are moradas here. Only, as far as I know, only here in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, because it's such a mountainous region where I am. Where I live at 7,000 feet up in the mountains in the Sangre de Cristos, and there weren't enough priests to go around. So in these remote regions like where I live, which is Taos, not remote anymore, but was remote in the 16th, 17th centuries, the people had to recreate their own religious rituals. And without priests, it became a kind of free-form emergence, very much influenced also by the indigenous people of this area, the Pueblo people of the Rio Grande Basin. And so it was this melding of Roman Catholicism with a little dash of Judaism, probably some Islam that made its way in as well, like the Moradas, and the acequia system, which is the irrigation system straight from the Moors of Spain that we use still to this day, exactly as it was brought to this region in the 16th century, with a whole complex governance system that's very, very old and medieval. And the moradas, which were the place where the penitente brotherhood did and still do their religious rituals, which center almost exclusively around Semana Santa, Holy Week, between Good Friday and Easter, when the penitente brotherhood recreates the Passion of Christ. This is the center point of this religious sect here in this region. And the rituals of the Holy Week, really primarily Good Friday, take place in these dark, rounded, windowless adobe structures called moradas. So I know that was a tangent, but I feel like it's relevant, and that's why I use the translation that's used here, which is dwelling, even though people don't actually live in the moradas. They only use them a couple of times a year for their rituals. So morada, just picture this warm, rounded, dark, womb-like structure. I mean, yes, it's a magnificent castle, crystal clear diamond that Teresa saw, but as she developed it more, it became more and more a dark morada where the light gets brighter the closer you get to the center. Teresa did not worry about logical consistency, my friends. She contradicts herself constantly. She recognizes it in her writing and chortles. She just makes fun of herself all the time, but basically says, please don't expect me to think like a priest, like a man, in other words. I am fully capable of rational thought, but it doesn't come close to expressing divine realities. So I'm just going to express this the best I can, even if it means I do so in a paradoxical fashion. So I hope you can resonate with that. I sure can. So how do we enter into this castle? She doesn't say anything about a moat and a bridge that crosses the moat, but I picture it, that the bridge that crosses the moat to the castle is the practice of contemplative prayer, of silent communing with the Holy One, of turning inward and saying yes. You know what Father Thomas Keating called assenting to the presence of God in centering prayer, or consenting. Consenting, I think, is the language he used. Or what Brother Lawrence, the friar of love, as Carmen Acevedo Butcher calls him, the practice of presence. All God wants for us is to say yes. Yes, I want to be with you right now. Teresa says in the Interior Castle that even if you are distracted during contemplative prayer, which, let's face it, who isn't? If you think that meditation and contemplation is all about stopping thoughts, I'm sure you all are mature enough to know that that's not the point, nor is it possible. And you're going to be miserable and think you're failing. Teresa says when we enter into the practice of contemplative prayer, that's all that matters, is that we are saying yes to this time to be with the friend with the capital F. What our thoughts are doing, wildly often agitated and thinking 1,000 things, is kind of irrelevant. She says, just saying, yes, I will be with you right now, God, this is what's happening, is all that is needed. In fact, she says, even when your thoughts are kind of feeling wild and unbridled and you can't stop thinking while you're trying to pray and meditate, don't worry about it. There's a striving, the word in Arabic is jihad, which is nothing to do with holy war. It has to do with that effort to align ourselves with God. That, she says, we gain great merit from sometimes grappling to try to quiet our minds. That's worth a lot right there. So we enter into contemplative prayer, and that gets us into the castle. But as we enter into the first gate, these little poisonous reptiles slip in behind us. What are these little slithering creatures? They are our attachments, our distractions, our everything that takes us away from being present with God in the center of our souls. Their job is to throw us off our track. And they take many forms. You can fill in the blanks. What are your distractions? What are your attachments? What are your addictions? What are the things that keep you from making that journey to wholeness that is your birthright? So one of the things I love most about Teresa, John of the Cross too, but especially Teresa, is that she engages in a co-creative relationship with God. It's John of the Cross calls it the active night of the soul and the passive night of the soul. For Teresa, it's all, in a sense, active. That is, we do the work. We cultivate the discipline of spiritual practice. And then God meets us halfway. Actually, God meets us way more than halfway. In the Quran, I think it's in the Quran, maybe it's a hadith in Islam, it says, if you take 5 steps toward Allah, Allah will take 10 steps toward you. You walk to Allah, Allah runs to you. In Judaism, during the High Holy Days, which are coming up in the fall, during the time of Teshuvah, of returning, it's between Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. There are 10 days. They call it the days of awe. And that's the same kind of phenomenon. During the days of awe, we're doing Teshuvah. We are practicing returning to right relationship with God. But it said during that 10-day period, God, more than ever, God is always endeavoring to meet us and receive us, but more than ever is flinging open the gates during that time. So that's what's happening in this journey of the interior castle voyage. God is meeting us and drawing us. So to enter another, I think this is my fourth or fifth religious metaphor today. I think of in Hinduism, Krishna, the god of love. He is known for being incredibly beautiful and alluring, and he plays a bamboo flute. And he's standing on the banks of the beautifully flowing Yamuna River, playing his flute music and inflaming the hearts of all the gopis. The gopis are the cow herding girls. They herd the sacred cows, and they all are just on fire with desire for Krishna when they hear the sound of his flute. And that's what's happening with the interior castle. The soul is hearing the sound of God's music emanating from the central chamber, and inflamed by what John of the Cross calls love longing, she makes her way ever inward. In the outermost chambers of the interior castle, the reptiles, the poisonous vipers, the venomous little creatures are really a problem. And it's dark, so it's hard to avoid them because you can't quite see. The light is so dim. Can't avoid them. You can't sidestep them so easily. But the closer you get to the center, the brighter the light becomes and the less problematic the obstacles, the impediments, let's say. We learn to almost befriend our neuroses and distractions and addictions and impediments. And we learn to not believe everything we think. We cultivate the discipline of contemplative prayer, even when it's not easy, even when it's dry, even when we're not getting the spiritual goodies. So this is the first dwelling of the interior castle is really a place of self-knowledge. Teresa says over and over again that there's nothing more important than knowing yourself. So did Socrates say this, that knowing ourselves is the first step. And it's a first step we come back to again and again. Every time we think we have it figured out, we must come back to what's called in Zen beginner's mind. There's another spiritual tradition for you. Coming back to beginner's mind again and again, never thinking we have it all figured out. And we will be tempted because the more deeply we enter into this journey, this interior journey, the more we do learn and know. And you can actually rest in some of what you learn about yourself and God on this inner journey. You can rest in it, you can rely on it, but don't ever take anything you think you figured out as the final truth. We know by unknowing again and again, as John of the Cross tells us. So we must continually cultivate humility. And that's why this first part of the journey, the entrance, the gate of contemplative prayer, I also see it as a magic carpet. That prayer is the magic carpet that brings you into the sacred space. And the first dwelling is a place of humility, of self-knowledge, and of continually coming back to start, to ground. Let me read a little passage to you now. It's actually a little bit longer than the other one, so just settle in, enjoy it, and listen with your heart. This is the end, the end of the first dwelling. Not quite the end, kind of the middle, actually. page 46. I am not sure if I've explained this well. She says this again and again. Self-knowledge is so important that I do not care how high you are raised up to the heavens. I never want you to cease cultivating it. As long as we are here on this earth, there is nothing more essential than humility. Enter the room of self-knowledge first, instead of floating off to some other places. This is the path. Traveling along a safe and level road, who needs wings to fly? Let's make the best possible use of our feet first and learn to know ourselves. And yet it seems to me that we will never know ourselves unless we seek to know God. Glimpsing his greatness, we recognize our own powerlessness. Gazing upon his purity, we notice where we are impure. Pondering his humility, we see how far from humble we are. What do we gain from this shift in perspective? A couple of things. First, it is clear that white seems much brighter against black, and black appears much darker set against the white. Also, when we turn away from our small selves and toward God, both our understanding and our will become more sublime and more inclined to embrace all that is good. We would do ourselves a great disservice if we never endeavored to rise above the mud of our personalized misery. Remember how dark and noxious are the streams that flow from the soul in grave error? It's a bit like that. If we are perpetually stuck in our little acre of tribulation, our stream will never flow free from the mire of fear and faint-heartedness. So Teresa is constantly beckoning us to be humble, but also bold. You see? So to, yes, allow ourselves to be a speck in the vastness of God's embrace, but also to stand in our power, in our co-creative relationship with the Holy One, and not collapse into what did she call it? Personalized misery and faint-heartedness, our own little acre of tribulation. We're so much bigger than that. We're so small and we're so vast. So this is some of her examples of fear and faint-heartedness. Okay, 500 years ago, friends, it sounds exactly, I don't know about you, but like what I can relate to today. Are they looking at me or not? We would be wondering. Will everything go wrong for me if I take this path? What's a wretched little person like me doing engaging in something as lofty as prayer? Won't I be perceived as superior if I don't follow the road everyone else is on? Extremes are no good, we would reason, even extremes in virtue. And since I'm such a sinner, my fall would be even more catastrophic. Besides, I doubt I'd make any progress anyway, and I'm likely to just cause trouble to good people. Someone like me doesn't need to make herself into anything special. So she's just going through the litany, of the inner monkey mind. Oh, God, help me, friends. How many souls has the spirit of evil ruined in just this way? They confuse these fears with humility. These fears arise from not knowing ourselves. Fear distorts knowledge of self. What we should really be afraid of is obsessing over ourselves and never getting free of ourselves. And so I say, my friends, let us set our eyes on Christ, our good, and on his saints. That is where we will learn true humility. Then our understanding will be enhanced. Then self-knowledge will not make us timid or cowardly. I could go on and on, but I know that my friend Carolyn Myss is resonating with this right now, or I suspect she is, and has some things to say. So I would love to hear what's on your heart right now.
It's so funny. I was reading this part of your book before you got to it.
Really?
And yeah. And my head, first of all, beautifully done. What a beautiful telling of her story. Beautiful, beautiful. Oh,
Thank you.
and I would like to just emphasize the significance of her teaching about humility and prayer. And I think that if we had the audience here in front of us, they would ask, but how do you start praying? And what is prayer? And how does that work? And the emphasis on what the role humility plays. And I came to my great reverence for it because of my work as a medical intuitive.
Yeah. Say more.
Which is how when I would do readings, I eventually through the years began to realize that life was really this journey of our figuring out how to use the power of our soul. That that's really what it amounts to. And that we go from a relationship to physical power, to emotional power, to the power of the self, to eventually the kind of power that Teresa's talking about, which is trusting in the power of God to work through our lives. Now that's a whole big journey. And it takes and when someone is deeply entrenched in the physical world, it's very difficult for them to even conceive of trusting something in the airwaves. It's very difficult to say to them, move toward God. What are you talking about? When in fact, everything in their life of any value are things they can touch, that they can handle, that they can. That's the only thing that matters to them. They can't even conceive of, what they can't touch, taste, smell, hear, feel, and or see. And what I realized is as I did more and more readings, I came to understand that the primary reason people lose power is the fear of being humiliated. And the fear of being humiliated is this primal, which is why when I got to Teresa, her work just was like this shot of lightning in me. It was the mystical counterpart to everything that I had learned as a medical intuitive. And that the fear of being humiliated is the most paralyzing fear for people. And the experience of being humiliated is the one unforgivable thing for people. That is what guts their soul. That is the wound that is the unforgivable, unhealable wound. That feeling that they were gutted. Which is why that in all spiritual traditions, the emphasis on being humble, which means it doesn't mean being poor. If you look up what humility and humbleness, it's about poverty. It's about having nothing, when in fact, it gives you the greatest freedom where nothing in the outside world controls you. What humbleness really means from the mystical point of view is that nothing in the outside world commands you, that you haven't given your pride to anything. You're not filled with hubris. You're not identifying with, if I don't have this, I won't be anybody. If I don't have a car, if I don't have this, these are the reptiles that get in your head. It's in fact this feeling of, it doesn't matter to me what I have or whatever. I have a reverence for myself, and I am fully empowered because my power doesn't come from stuff. My power doesn't come from a phone. It doesn't come from a car. My power comes from something indescribably greater than me, that that is mystical.
Yeah.
And so she would always say, stay humble, stay humble so that you can hear God. And when she's talking about um, getting to know yourself, this journey of self-knowledge, it really is this incredibly exquisite and rigorous and challenging path of getting to know who you are and why you are the way you are
Mm.
and what stands and um, why you have the obstacles in yourself and what stops you from having a wild relationship with the mystical world, a wild relationship with the mystical world. You know, years ago, years and years ago, when I first started teaching, I started a workshop with, I thought, well, it's people were doing like a moment of silence. I saw other teachers do that, and that's not my style. And so I thought I would start with, some kind of prayer. And someone in my audience said, "I didn't come here to pray." And this was a seminar on spirituality. I thought, what? Okay, so that was, I could feel the dripping hostility toward Catholicism coming off this person. So, and it wasn't. I wasn't even going to pull out a Catholic prayer nearby. I I shut down and I said to myself, I am never, ever, 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 never going to say anything about prayer again, and in a workshop ever, so never. And by God, I did not until I wrote Entering the Castle. And on my book tour, on the first day of the book tour, I had an audience of 850 people.
Oh my God.
And I'm describing the interior castle to the best of my ability. I had an audience of 850 people, and they were spellbound. They were spellbound. You think that I was describing, like the Ritz Carlton or some kind of, I mean, and then they said, "Take us there. I mean, take us there. We want to go. We want to go," and as if it was a place, right? And I said, "Well, the only way to get into this inner place is through prayer." And then I thought, and I thought to myself, and I'm not going there with you. But they all sat there, like, okay. And I thought, are you kidding me? And so I led them in this deep prayer,
Mm.
meditation, visualization of crossing their drawbridge and going into their interior castle. Nearby, no one moved, and I couldn't believe the ease with which I was doing this.
Mm.
It was a deep, deep, beautiful kind of prayer meditation. I'm extremely uncomfortable doing that. I was then. Okay. At the end, when I concluded it, still nobody moved. And I actually had to say, it's over.
Mm.
Nobody came out. All right. Then I went to do my book signing. Now I'm signing books, signing books, signing books. And this woman came up behind me and she said, "I just thought you'd like to know that I had crippling arthritis for 25 years and I don't have it now. I'm healed. I don't know what happened, but I'm healed." And she walked out. And what happened after that was every single book signing, because my book signings were always workshopped kind of things, like they are with you. Um, I would do this prayer that took people into the interior castle, and there would be a healing. And this is what began my work in healing. And there would be a healing. Or I would receive letters about something that happened after, for a few weeks. Someone with a brain tumor, a malignant terminal brain tumor, was healed. Um, I had, the list goes on and on. And one of the, I think one of the graces that people have in common when they are seriously terminally ill is they no longer put up the fight. My father used to say, there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. It's a World War II Marine kind of thing. But the truth is that whole emphasis on being humble is that there is such a fear of God. There's such a fear of the power of God. There's a fear that somehow or other, if someone deeply believed that this off-planet force is going to sweep in and take everything you have and turn you into a street urchin or some beggar on the street, because that's what God wants. God wants you to be a beggar on the street and poor and begging. And I mean, the absurdity, and it comes from the Catholic history of, go to a monastery, be poor and beg. And so I can see how people, the division of body and soul, and the division of wealth and poverty for the spiritual and wealth for those who aren't spiritual, which is why wealthy people who are criminals built churches. But the humbleness is the path to hearing outrageous guidance and miracles. It's the path of saying, I need some help here. And the nature of heaven is that it doesn't play by the rules of human being. It is the human beings. It is the way of, it can make anything work with you and through you. And human beings are always frightened because of the fear of being humiliated. They're always thinking, what will others think? What will others think? And when you're liberated from that incredible burden, you're like, just get me out of this. And the universe might say, well, then go that way. And I think about this woman. I just told this story, and I wrote about it in Invisible Acts of Power. And she thought of herself as a healer. She was jogging, and she came upon a woman whose dog had been hit by a car. And she stood there and thought, oh my gosh, what do I do? And she heard that kind of inner guidance that said, go put your hands on that dog. But her response was, well, what if it doesn't work? Okay, that's what pride does. That's what hubris does. But it's all about me. And if it doesn't work, then what do I do? And what do I say? Instead of just saying, okay, and being detached from the outcome, which is maybe the animal will die. But the point is, I'm following orders, and the outcome is not in my hands. I'm following what God is telling me to do. And that's all there's to it.
Yeah.
There is no rational outcome. This is what people don't get. With heaven, the outcome is never rational. It's never logical. It is mystical and miraculous. Mm-hmm. And that's what Teresa understood. And that's why when she's talking about self-knowledge, she's telling you to unwrap yourself so you can get out of yourself.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I'm so madly in love with her, and you did such a beautiful job.
Oh, thank you, Carolyn. Well, she's preparing us in the first dwelling for the magic and the miracles that are coming in the second dwelling. Mm-hmm. So on Thursday, we're going to dive into that aspect of the journey, but it can't, those kind of synchronicities and magical moments that abound in the spiritual life can't happen if we're mired in self-doubt or hubris, which are, right, according to you, it sounds like tonight, the same thing.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly right. That's right.
So we have to cultivate the discipline of knowing ourselves, of stripping away all the delusions, and then we clear space for those miraculous moments that you're referring to come, and they do come.
And you know what else? Another one of her beautiful teachings that I appreciate every single day. Every single day. There isn't a day that goes by that this does not resonate with me, which is to look for God in the small details of your life. In the small details. Not great big huge things,
Right.
but in the small. And it's in the smallest details, the smallest little thing. The person who um, the person who says the kindest word, I mean, it's those types of things when you get used to the fact that even that's woven into your life by some kind of um, divine intervention.
Mhm.
That's when you really drop your jaw in awe.
Yes.
That's it. When you realize, I mean, you and I missed our chart time this year. We were supposed to
Right.
go to chart, right? Isn't that funny? But honestly, I heard that guidance that said, "Go home,
Yeah.
go home," and it was there was no logic to it, Mirabai. There was no logic. There was no and I said to myself, and this is how heaven works with me. I said, well, if Joyce cancels, 6 seconds later, the person who was supposed to join me on the trip texted me and said, I'm canceling. And I went right downstairs. I never bargain with my guidance. I never, if whatever it tells me to do, I do. I went downstairs and in 20 minutes changed my flight and I came home.
Hmm.
And um, and I think that the whole thing with the way that kind of got in the small details, for me, that was one of those moments where I think in another lifetime I would have said, well, I need proof and I need this and I need that.
Yeah.
But for me, the next text, everything was like God in the details. Go. I told you to go. I don't need another reason. I hear the instruction. I didn't sit back and say, but I paid for this trip and they're expecting me and da 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 da. None of that was relevant. None of it. It was, I could have sat back and said, but I haven't been out of the country in 3 years and I wanted to do this. And when I got my instructions and I came.
Yeah.
As simple as that.
Well, through a life of prayer, you obviously have, and many of us can make ourselves available to that guidance. And to the magic of the smallest moments that we miss when we're disconnected from our soul.
Yeah.
Everything can become a source of awe when we make ourselves available to the breaking in of heaven, as you call it, right
Mhm.
here. And Teresa was, you're right, she was the queen of the magic of the small. And in fact, her protege, let's see how many hundred years later, 400 years later, Therese of Lisieux,
Yes.
no, 300 years later,
Agree.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, who named her was named after Teresa of Avila, Therese of Lisieux, Carmelite nun, sister who died at age 24, I think, or 26 of
Yes. She was
tuberculosis.
26.
Yeah.
26, I think.
She was called the Little Flower, and that
Mhm.
was precisely her spiritual path, as it was Francis of Assisi's in many ways. That he called his brotherhood the little poor ones, right? And
Mhm.
for Therese, it was the little flower. She said, I am just like a daisy in a field, just as common and just as singular.
Mhm. Mhm.
And Mother Teresa, who's now also Saint Teresa, was, drew her way of being of service in the world from Therese when she said, in fact, I think it originally came from Therese of Lisieux, it's not important to do great things, but to do small things with great love.
That's exactly right. It's just do small things and let God take care of the consequences. Let God take care of I mean, I think, again, returning to the power of being humble
Hmm.
and why it's the first mansion. When you're so afraid of being humiliated, you create a scale of achievement for yourself that's not based on guidance but on protection.
Hmm.
And so that what motivates you is never this genuine inner guidance, but it's defensiveness and it's fear and it's vulnerability. And so you tend to make choices for all the wrong reasons instead of choosing from your creativity, instead of choosing from guidance, when guidance really speaks to you, because the way heaven works is it never, ever, ever gives you the whole tree. It gives you a seed.
Mm.
It gives you an acorn. It never gives you the tree. That has always been the way of heaven, and it always will be. And it does that for your own protection so that you do not fall on the sword of expectations and attitudes, and your shadow side takes over. It always gives you a small thing that you nurture with the power of your soul, and with mystery and trust. And that's how heaven works. It never gives you a garden. It gives you a small patch of earth and seeds, and from that you discover you have what it takes to be a gardener. It never gives you a patch of vegetables. I
Right.
mean, that's just not how heaven works. You have to understand the way of heaven. It's always so that you can discover something about yourself. It's not heaven's way to make your life easy, but to make it incredible.
Right. I love that. It's not about finding ways to make your life easy, but to make it incredible.
But that's the truth. But that's the truth.
And so don't bother, friends, walking this way unless you're ready for incredible. If you're looking for easy, this is the interior journey is not for you because it's harrowing at times and it's glorious.
But I honestly think that there is nothing as valuable as teaching now the mystical path in a world that is on fire with
Yes.
chaos and
Yes.
confusion. And when someone, if someone said to me, the mystical way doesn't make sense, do you think this world makes sense? Do
Right.
you think the idiocy of this world makes sense? That this is a world full of sanity, when
Right.
in fact the mystical way is such clarity in it is clarity, it is tranquility, it is healing, it is transcendent over all of the madness that is unfolding and is going to continue to unfold.
Yeah, I feel like it's our only hope is to cultivate that inner connection.
I do. And I think that's why it's come back.
Yeah.
I think that's why the work of Teresa of Avila is, and Teresa of Lisieux,
Mhm.
Hildegard, all and Francis, all the great saints, Rumi, are really in a renaissance because,
Julian of Norwich.
and Julian of Norwich, all of them, because they are needed so much now.
Yeah.
I really do believe that.
It's extraordinary how these people who lived 500 years ago, lives seemingly daily lives pretty different from ours, are so relevant and so resonant. I mean, in Teresa's language, it's so practical and grounded
Right.
and no bullshit. You know, she just tells it
Yeah.
like it is with great humility
Yeah.
and great confidence.
Yep. Yep.
And
Yep.
it just penetrates through that whole fog of I don't know, preconceptions about what spiritual life is supposed to be.
Yep. Well, can I put you on the spot and have you pick something to close this wonderful first lesson with?
Oh, sure. I
This book is so beautiful. I love how you translated this book.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's what brought us together. I remember when I reached out to you when you were writing Entering the Castle. I heard you were writing Entering the Castle, and I was a follower. And and I said, I have this new translation. You said, yeah, well, what are your credentials? And I said, well, I teach
But
college and blah, 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 but that's not what's interesting or important, Carolyn. The relevant part is that I just am madly in love with this teacher and her teachings. Mhm.
yep, that's how
And
we met.
and that seemed to speak to you.
Yep.
Mhm.
I didn't care about everything else. But as soon as you said you were madly in love with her, that did it.
Oh gosh. Okay. How about so I'm reading from this. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
This little book. So I did for Sounds True. I did this little book of it's a contemplative book of all my favorite passages from the Interior Castle and the Book of My Life with some of my own like meditative reflections. So I was just going to sort of randomly open it. But did you have something else in mind, Caroline?
No, darling. I want you to close it with something that is precious to you.
Okay. There we go. I'm just, this is sort of random. I'm just taking one of my little flag things and trusting that it'll be the right one. Sometimes I observe people so diligently trying to orchestrate whatever state of prayer they're in that they become peevish about it. They don't dare to move or let their minds be stirred for fear of jeopardizing the slightest degree of devotion or delight. It makes me realize how little they understand about the path to union. They think the whole thing is about rapture. But no, friends, no. What the beloved wants from us is action. What he wants is that if one of your friends is sick, you take care of her. Don't worry about interrupting your devotional practice. Have compassion. If she is in pain, you feel it too. If necessary, you fast so that she can eat. This is not a matter of indulging an individual. You do it because you know it is your beloved's desire. That is true union with his will. So, lest we think that Teresa was all about transcendence, but I already told you her story, she was also very practical, and compassion in action was of vital importance to the spiritual life for Teresa.
That was beautiful. Thank you, sweetheart. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we will see you for lesson 2 in a couple of days.
Yay. Thanks so much. I can't wait.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.